This episode of 123 CMMC has been brought to you by A3, an assessment accreditation application developed by CyberDI. A3 is a CMMC cloud-based collaborative environment for an organization seeking certification, OSC, to build CMMC packages and share with a marketplace of consultant, RPOs, and assessor C3PAOs. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to yet another episode of 123 CMMC. My name is Dana Mantilia. I am your host, and today our special guest is Carter Schoenberg, and his company is Soundway Consulting. So welcome, Carter. Why don't you take a minute and just tell us a little bit about yourself and your company?
Sure, Dana. Thank you very much for being able to have me on. It's a pleasure to be able to speak with you. So my name is Carter Schoenberg. I am the Vice President for Cybersecurity and Chief Cybersecurity Officer for Soundway Consulting. Soundway Consulting is a small woman-owned HubZone government contractor. It's been around for a little over a decade and mostly focusing on support in the intelligence communities arena. But as of around October, a plan to help support the government contracting arena by launching a commercial-to-commercial service offering with CMMC. And I was brought on board to lead that program as of January of this year.
Okay, well, that's great. And so today we are going to talk about the people side of CMMC, not just the IT world, right?
Yeah. So it's a great topic. One thing I think is very important for the audience members to understand is that to date, more money is being spent on cyber today than ever before. And all stats show that it's going to continue to increase. The question you're going to have to ask yourself is, do you really feel at the end of the day that your risk posture is improving proportionate to that level of spend? My professional opinion is that the answer to that is no. And I think that the majority of that reason is because we're focusing so much on what are we going to buy in terms of metal, in terms of technologies to be able to help us not only reduce our cyber risk posture, but especially with regards to CMMC, being able to make sure that we can check boxes to be able to show conformance with that particular program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one of the biggest things is this is not just an IT situation here, and it's got to be a cultural change throughout the organization. So what do you think they could do to maximize use the people side of things as opposed to just the IT?
Yeah, so based on the engagements that we've seen to date, not only working on behalf of Soundway, but previously having done this now for about 20 years, the majority of the challenges are centered around when an organization, in this case, an organization seeking certification, really evaluates CMMC as most companies do with cyber. It's a pure play IT type of environment. And unfortunately, that's not really the case in today's threat landscape. Companies are doing themselves a disservice if they are no longer viewing cyber as a business threat, no different than fire, theft, or even flood type of damage. There's obviously a lot of resource constraints. There's no shortages of articles that have been published with regards to the shortage on cybersecurity talent. Having said that, some of the challenges that we are experiencing to date are in many ways, unfortunately, self-inflicted. And what I mean by that is that there are a vast number of individuals out there that have initial cybersecurity qualifications, but human resources, and it's not limited to any one company or any one vertical, but human resources will generally take a position of saying, oh, well, it's a junior role. We need at least show that you have 2 years of professional experience. And as a result of that, and then you take into consideration other factors, especially in CMMC, okay, well, you can't be a foreign national. Mm-hmm. I think it's important to also understand that in this marketplace, when you go for cybersecurity graduate or undergraduate programs, over 65% are actually foreign national. So that creates a little bit of a challenge on the human side for companies being able to meet this. Mm-hmm. But having said that, it's not all doom and gloom. There are definitely things that organizations can do with their existing staff to be able to help address the conformance requirements for CMMC. So first, when you have your IT staff, again, you want to really try to have a better understanding of what your core business is, what's it responsible for doing, and to simply say, well, we support the U.S. government. Okay, but in what way? Mm-hmm. What type of data sets do you currently maintain, store, or transmit on behalf of the U.S. government or even as a corporate government enterprise. A lot of the time that we see government contractors only looking at regulatory requirements as being dictated by the U.S. federal government and incorporating the Department of Defense under that umbrella. But it's also very important for companies to understand you're still a corporate enterprise and you have to meet the legal standard of care as it applies to being able to safeguard and apply best practices. So when we're talking about the people element, it's not just from the perspective of, okay, what's my IT person doing? But from a legal perspective, who's on board from having that legal knowledge base? Is it a corporate contracts individual? Is it in-house general counsel? Do you have a relationship with third-party legal representation to be able to help guide you and understand what your conformance requirements are to meet these new contractual obligations for CMMC? But also in addition to that, to make sure that you're meeting the obligatory requirements, because now all 50 states have data breach notification requirements in there. And with regards to CMMC, the biggest challenge from a people perspective or the people element is that inherent separation of duties requirement. So even if we're going to take the position of saying, hey, you know what, CMMC, that's still kicking the can down the road a few years. They're a little late getting things out there, which is a fair assessment. However, having said that, even if an organization is trying to demonstrate conformance with NIST 800-171, there is obligatory requirements defined in there for showing separation of duties. So what do we really mean by that? What we mean by that is that the person that's responsible for IT should not be technically responsible for the oversight of IT. So there's the old adage, is kind of like the fox watching the hen house kind of thing. So some companies have taken the position of saying, oh, well, if that's the case, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get Jack from HR to be the checks and balances. Well, one of the things that I was pleasantly surprised to see is that the accreditation body, when it created its initial training for registered practitioners, which are those that have undergone an initial level of training, tested out, been approved, or properly vetted by the accreditation body, within that training clearly shows that when the assessors are coming to identify and look at what your separation of duties actually is, those individuals that are acting on behalf of the security side of the house need to be able to demonstrate that they have the qualifications in that capacity. So simply saying I'm robbing Peter to pay Paul is not going to be a valid strategy to be able to meet these obligations. So there are a couple of things that might be worthwhile for your audience members to consider. One is the use of potentially outsourcing fractional services. These are the kinds of services that Soundwave provides. We have actually an offering that we call separation of duty service offering. But in addition to that, under the former presidential administration, actually cyber became one of the items that can now be defined as an apprentice program. And the apprentice program actually enables state tax benefits, depending on what state you're in. It varies from state to state. But that allows organizations for, at a much lower cost, to be able to bring in somebody with some level of skill sets that will meet the requirements for what an assessor will be looking for most likely. And in addition to that, not have the full financial burden and commitment to be able to say, I'm hiring this person full time at traditional market rate. And depending on what you're looking for, even junior cybersecurity people, you're probably looking at a minimum of in the mid-high 60s. And if you're in the National Capital Region, you're talking the mid-high 70s.
Wow. I like that separation of duty thing that you offer. That's a really, really good idea to help with the overall expense of this.
Yeah.
I always use the analogy, it's like accounts payable and accounts receivable. You can't have the same person that's taking the bills and paying the bills, because, that's not a good practice to have, because
Yep.
somebody can steal, because no one will ever know who's paying and who's not. But anyway, so I love that. I love that separation of duties. That's an excellent idea. So now let me just jump over to scope here. So what's the easiest way for a contractor to just start to realize, okay, who's involved, what's involved, what do I even need to kind of keep into the scope here when looking at what CMMC is related to it?
Yeah, so that's a fantastic question. And oddly enough, it's not as challenging, in my opinion, as I've seen some individuals in social media try to make it out to be. And what I mean by that is actually within the CMMC requirements, once you're at like a maturity level 3 and you have a reasonable conclusion that you're going to be maintaining, storing, or transmitting controlled unclassified information, you actually have an obligation to do what is called a CUI data flow, which means that you first need to identify what types of data sets within the CUA data categories as defined by NARA, the National Archives and Records Administration. And they actually have a very, very clearly defined list. If you just do a Google on NARA, N-A-R-A, CUI registry, and you'll see that list. So once you're able to define which one of those data sets either are applicable to you now, or it's reasonable for you to conclude based on contracts that you want to pursue in the near term, that is going to basically be the initial set. So these are the data categories that we have a logical conclusion that, yes, we are going to be responsible for housing. Once you've done that, then it's easier to understand within your network, depending on how small or how large it is, where would that data set actually reside? And then once you're able to understand who and how that is going to, where it's going to reside, then you can kind of reverse engineer who, the people who is going to actually need to have access to it. Mm-hmm. So you're kind of going in reverse order, but by going in reverse order, it's easier to then be able to say, oh, okay, well, I've got 5,000 employees, but now they reverse engineered it. There's really only 21 people that need to actually touch this stuff. So let me go ahead and create my scoping definition for CMMC conformance around that subset of my total base of employees.
I like that reverse engineering. That's a great idea. And that's also going to help take a little bit of the intimidation out of somebody saying, hey, I have 500 employees. Oh my goodness, this is going to be so overwhelming. And doing exactly what you just did, reverse engineer who actually needs access or, has this on their device, and then say, like you just said, hey, there's only 21 people. So now, whoa, that just sounds a lot easier to manage. So that's really good. I like that one.
And one of the other things to keep in mind, Dan, is once you've taken that approach, not only does it help from the scoping perspective for people, but also for costing. Because if you're taking into consideration now, and I'm not favoring any one vendor, I'm just calling out one. If you are making a decision to go into Microsoft's GCC high environment, that's considerably more expensive than the commercial version of it. But obviously, if you're able to say, well, I only had to take the hit on 21 people versus 224 people, there's a cost savings that's associated there, which will help organizations better define how do they strategically define what their investment strategies to conform with CMMC will actually look like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. And people may not have known that you could do that with just as GCC high with just a certain number of employees versus having it for everybody. So that's a very good tip there. Okay. All right. Now, so how are people the linchpin to causing the problems?
So it's an interesting topic to cover because we hear it all the time. People are the weakest link. And I would be lying to you if I said that in 2021, I'm still not a little head scratching at this because, if we were in 2001, 2005, people really wouldn't have an expectation of understanding what's going on in cyberland. But in today's realm where you can't open a browser, turn on TV, or even pick up a newspaper and not hear about your latest, greatest security breach, I do find it a little perplexing that we're still in this environment of, well, how was I supposed to know? Mm-hmm. So we see this consistently, not only with regards to the general rank and file of employees, but in many cases, even mid and sometimes upper level management of organizations. So we try not to look at the aspect of, well, why don't you know this? Because it's really irrelevant. but how can we help organizations better understand what they need to do and how to dramatically lower their exposure to the people being the linchpin by causing a crisis? And we come up with a variety of different scenarios for them. One is making recommendations for cybersecurity training. And I know it seems in some cases a little bit trivialized, because I've heard people come up with, well, there's no statistics to be able to show that by having this training, you're dramatically reducing my likelihood of having a security event. And while maybe those data sets don't exist, what I can say firsthand from Soundwave's perspective, since we've implemented these enhanced capabilities and requirements, we are now seeing a dramatic increase of individuals saying, hey, Carter, I just got this email. This looks weird to me. Can you help me better define, am I just being paranoid, or is this legitimately somebody trying to come after me? And not only for our company, but also for our clients as well, as we're providing recommendations on how to enhance the knowledge base of the overall populace, of the employee base for each of the clients that we serve. Now, that's just on the training side, but unfortunately, when it hits the fan, people are historically very panicky by nature, and not having a good crisis management plan and testing that crisis management plan also kind of creates people as the linchpin. So Mike Tyson, great former boxer, arguably had one of the funniest and best lines I've ever heard. Everybody thinks that they've got a plan until they're punched in the face. And it's just as true with cyber as it is with boxing, because until people become acclimated to understanding what they need to do and why they need to do it. My former background was in law enforcement, and the one thing that they told us is you have to do something 1,200 times before it becomes muscle memory. I'm not suggesting somebody does something in cyber 1,200 times, but you need to at least be able to do it several times. So one, it's not quite so scary. Two, you can apply lessons learned. And three, you have a little bit of a level of comfort of, yeah, this stinks, this is bad, but you know what? We at least have a game plan. We're not going to freak out, because when you freak out, you lose valuable cycle time. And make no mistake, in the time of a crisis event, cycle time equates to money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you think about when we were kids, every single kid knows what a fire drill is. And, you think, knock on wood, it's not like every day we're hearing on the news of a school burning down, but every single person knew exactly what to do for a fire drill. And that's the way we need to kind of look at these is, if something happens, number one, how are we dealing with the issue? The other thing is also the reputational damage. And what are your employees doing? Is somebody on Twitter telling it, 40,000 followers, guess what? I think we're getting hacked at work today, because bad things come of that. I mean, I heard one story where there was a bank teller at the bank. They thought something maybe was going on, and so they brought the IT department in. And meanwhile, she's on there on her social media saying, oh, I'm at work right now, and we think somebody is attacking the system. Well, about 300 people showed up to come down to withdraw their money. It was all this pandemonium, and it turned out it wasn't even an actual attack that was going on. So you created all that chaos for no reason. However, if all the employees knew, listen, this is what our communication rule is. If we suspect there's a situation, you can at least get your arms around it a little bit, as opposed to everybody's running around with their hair on fire saying whatever they want to say. So
I want to piggyback on that point, though, Dana, because one of the things I don't think a lot of people take into consideration is what you just described. So within CMMC, once you're at maturity level 3, there actually is a requirement that can the organization seeking certification clearly define is CUI being posted on publicly available content. And while this isn't necessarily CUI, this does directly tie back into what is being covered in an incident response plan or a data handling policy and procedure. And to your point, do all the employees even understand what the rules of the road are in this particular case? And also understanding, depending on each individual company, it may even warrant administrative sanctioning, whether it's a write-up in your file, suspension of a day, whatever the case may be. That's up to each individual organization. But it's important to understand active communication, clearly defining roles and responsibilities. What are the expectations of obligations, and are there any potential sanctions and penalties when you're not conforming with it, with the corporate perspective on how they're addressing these issues.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And now this ties into our next thing. So before we even get into this, I just want to say that, people, everything is reactionary. Oh, we'll deal with it if something happens. But when you have a situation, which we all are eventually going to have some sort of situation, and the FBI shows up and they say, we would like to talk about how you were protecting the data before the breach. If you don't have anything to say, or they go interviewing your employees and there's really no, well, we thought it was secure, it was in the cloud, something like that, that's going to tie in completely with the fines and the fees. And chances are, as they say, 60% of those companies go out of business within 6 months of having a breach if they're not prepared. So anyway, so go ahead. So now if there is a crisis, what are the 2 artifacts that are going to be most scrutinized?
Yeah. So, and again, just focusing on the background that I've experienced. So because of the wide range of roles and responsibilities that I've held, probably a little over 1,000 man hours in court between criminal and civil proceedings. And having been directly involved in a number of cases on the civil side, the 2 core artifacts that are always going to be in front and center, whether it's in the scenario as you're describing, with their FBI is coming in, which would more likely than not, for concerns for organizations seeking certification, could be a federal investigative body, but more likely than not, it will probably be legal counsel for a plaintiff claiming that you did wrong somehow, some way. And when they come in and they do that, the 2 things that they're most likely going to be looking for is, 1, what does your access control policies and procedures look like? And what is your incident response plan? Bar none, because they are going to be leveraging that, whether it is through filing motions for subpoenas, through interrogatories, which are basically kind of like formal Q&As that are used in a court of law. And they're going to be able to go through that with a fine-tooth comb to be able to say, okay, well, help us understand, because you're saying this is your corporate policy, but yet you didn't do any of these things here. Or is it reasonable for us to conclude that while you did this, and this was a great document 5 years ago, how have you updated these based on today's current threat landscape? And what would a reasonable and prudent individual sitting on a jury conclude based on today's current threat environment? It's not to say that, yep, we did it, we came up with it, here it is, it's ready to go, but it's 5 years old now. So, I mean, I would be lying to you if I said that I had not been engaged in helping clients. And when we're getting to that point, can you kind of show us some of these artifacts? And they're 3-ring binders, and they have some dust on them because it was a one and done. And that was the approach, which unfortunately kind of ties back to this. You cannot look at cyber as a pure play IT threat environment any longer. You have to be able to look at this no different than any other of your business aspects. I would say that, I think you made the point earlier talking about, like, with accountants. I certainly don't think that you're ever going to have an accountant or a legal professional say, oh, well, we have this artifact from, 5 years ago. We haven't reviewed it since because none of the tax codes have ever changed, or none of the case laws have ever changed, which are going to be directly impact how we want to either defend or prosecute a civil case. Mm-hmm. So making sure that you have these artifacts, which now, again, are going to be required under CMMC, have 2 values. 1, not only helping you demonstrate conformance with CMMC, but also giving you the definitive artifacts that you're going to need to, 1, dramatically enhance your cybersecurity posture of your company, and 2, be able to provide you those objective pieces of evidence when called upon from potentially opposing counsel for a civil case.
Mm-hmm. And to swing it back to CMMC, if you have this old dusty old binder, and maybe people did have some kind of cyber training, 5-6 years ago, the assessors are going to walk around and they can ask the employees, what kind of training have you had recently? And, everyone's got to have the same answer. You can't just, say, well, I think we saw something a few years ago. Or,
Right.
I've never had any, kind of thing. So,
yep.
So anyway, well, I really, really appreciate your time and expertise. Is there anything else you'd like to add to, before we go?
Well, I'd just like to be able to add, again, I know that there is a lot of indecisions, a lot of ambiguity, and a lot of concern that's stemming around CMMC right now. The important thing to understand is that, one, there is no information that really supports this is going away. If anything, it is going forward, albeit a bit slow. But I would take advantage of that a bit slow to the OSC's advantage, so that way they can adequately prepare. One thing I don't know if people are even aware of is that GovWin, which is a large enterprise solution that you pay for to be able to see what type of opportunities are coming out from the U.S. government, now actually have CMMC ratings associated with the future contracts. So I think it's very, very important for organizations to understand if these are going to be the types of contracts that you want to pursue in the future. Again, give yourself enough runway. I know that it's been socialized. You can do level 3 in 6 months. Historically, I'm advising you're better off giving yourself an 8 to 12 month window, because you not only are going to be able to say that you have created something or that you've done something, you will have to be able to demonstrate to the assessors that you have, quote unquote, operationalized it. And the only way that you're going to be able to demonstrate that you've operationalized something is to be able to demonstrate that you've done it more than one time, whether that's running a vulnerability scan, running a tabletop exercise, or being able to show that you have more than one version of a particular document. And thank you again for being able to have us on.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And the other thing is that, even like a visitor log, you can't hand them a blank visitor log and say, well, you got to have some time under your belt here with the visitor log. So anyway, that's just a little simple thing. But anyway, thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. And thank you everybody for watching. And we hope to see you on the next episode of 123 CMMC.
Thank you very much, everybody. Take care.
This episode of 123 CMMC has been brought to you by A3, an assessment accreditation application developed by CyberDI. A3 is a CMMC cloud-based collaborative environment for an organization seeking certification, OSC, to build CMMC packages and share with a marketplace of consultant, RPOs, and assessor C3PAOs.